Hi friends from Really Living. We miss you guys so much.
Hi
Tina. We are doing well here in Alberta. Thank you for your prayers. Everything is so beautiful in here, but we miss the church so much and we miss our friends. And we are happy to be here this morning to pray with you. And Pedro's gonna pray for us.
Okay, bow your heads for prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for everything you have given us. Thank you as we're praying right here. Help us have a good rest of the day. Thank you for all the blessings you have given us, and help all the families out there at the church and online, and help everybody who's having troubles. And thank you, God. In Jesus' name I pray, amen.
Amen.
Bye.
We miss you.
Yeah.
We love you guys.
What's up, David?
Tina.
Bye-bye. Good morning. I just want to introduce you to this funny-looking people that were on the screen a little earlier. It's the Ferreira family. Here at Really Living, we have many, many families, and the Ferreiras came to us from Toronto at some point, and ultimately from Brazil. That's where they're from, and now they've moved to Calgary. So it was nice to hear from them. And Tina is my wife, and Tina and Kevin had this special relationship. I'm kind of sad he didn't say hi, Francis, but I thought we had a relationship too, but I guess Tina took over. I want to welcome you. I know that there are many of you who are here for the first time at Really Living. You're online, but the reason why you're here is because you were invited by a friend, somebody who you trust and somebody in whom you have a relationship with. And so when it comes to this concept of Daniel, more than likely, you probably and you clicked on this link, and there was this big lion, and then you saw the title, Daniel, Lions, Dreams, and Deception. And for some of you who have been around the Bible for a long time, or for some of you who have, read the Bible, you know what the you know what the book of Daniel teaches, and some of you may be like, what is this all about? Let me just give you a little bit of an introduction here. Some of you who are listening to us right now have perhaps never read the Bible. You may not even own one, but I recommend at this point in time that maybe you go online and you just go on Bible.com and get the Bible on your computer or on your iPad or on your phone, and that you follow along with us as we study this book called Daniel. And the Bible is split up into two portions. So we have Old Testament, and then we have the New Testament. And so basically everything in the Old Testament was written before Jesus was born, and everything that's written in the New Testament was written after Jesus. Did I say that right? Old Testament before Jesus was born, and the New Testament after Jesus was born. So there's 66 books, and Daniel is just one of them. And it was written 2,600 years ago. And so here we go. I hope that this will be a journey that you will enjoy. And I find this story incredibly inspiring. And about someone who, in my opinion, makes it against all odds. And I call him the underdog. Hollywood is full of underdog stories, isn't it? You get the kid who, scruffy kid who gets the quarterback position in a football team. Or you get the average-looking kid who gets the gorgeous girl. or perhaps the poor man who strikes it rich on Wall Street. And perhaps one of my most favorite underdog stories is the one of Rocky Balboa. Come on now. Against Apollo Creed, against Clubber Lang, against Drago from Russia. And somehow he takes the hits, and he takes the hits, but he comes up the winner. Adrian! Right? Right? You following me? I've always been a fan of underdogs. That's why I'm a Montreal Canadiens fan. And Daniel was an underdog if there ever was one. But his story is nothing like Hollywood. It's actually true. Yet, what he revealed to the whole world in his book is nothing short of life-changing. From sleeping with lions to revelations from God through dreams. And then he opened up the eyes of the world to what is really going on behind the scenes and helping us to decipher through deceptions. And no one saw this coming, especially not Daniel. Come on, he's just a snot-nosed kid from Jerusalem, a teenager. So you may think that I'm exaggerating, as a lot of people do when they talk about the Bible. You know, if you follow God, He's going to do this for you. And I was actually listening to something this morning. I'm like, dude, you're the preacher, you're way off, man. Because it's not because you believe in God that everything's always going to go well. And this guy was saying everything's going to go well. It's not the case. But I really do believe that the book of Daniel has a potential to change your life. And I'm in good company. I'm in very good company. Christopher Columbus, the early discovery of the Americas, the one who discovered Americas, was a diligent student of the book of Daniel. One of the things that compelled Columbus to set out on his discovery of the New World was his study of the prophecies of Daniel. For you see, he understood by studying the book of Daniel that the world wasn't going to last forever. And therefore he thought, there's parts of the world that haven't been discovered, and there's people who still don't know what I know. And so I'm going to travel to tell people the good news about God. And it was Daniel that got him going. What about Sir Isaac Newton? The famous British mathematician and scholar was confirmed in his belief that the Bible was truly the Word of God because of, I know, some of the kids are just getting out of school now. They don't want to hear this word. Mathematics. Because of mathematics. The fact that Daniel's prophecies actually worked mathematically made him a believer. And Timothy Dwight, he was the 8th president of Yale College, now Yale University. And during the time of the French Revolution in the late 1700s, a number of students at Yale began to accept the arguments of European scholars that questioned the existence of God and doubted in the truthfulness of the Bible. We have a lot of people like that today. And he was challenged by hundreds of his now acclaimed atheist students. And so he announced that he wanted to meet with the whole student body in a chapel on a Thursday afternoon. And they filed into the chapel, and Timothy walked in. He had a table up front with a pile of books this high. And you've got over 1,000 students sitting in this room, and they see the pile of books. He puts them on a table, and then he asked the students to come to the mic, their arguments against the Bible. Once they were done, then he opened the book of Daniel. He started to read the prophecies in the book of Daniel. Some of the same prophecies that we're going to talk about in future presentations. Because, by the way, this is one of 12. And so, welcome back any Saturday if you want to watch it live. And if you can't come on Saturday because you got a tea time or something like that, then you can always go on the website and we have them archived there so you can watch them at your leisure. But the good thing about coming on Saturday morning is that, well, you get to listen to the praise team live if you enjoy it. And also, starting next Saturday, we're going to start opening up and people are going to be able to come in and see it in 3D And you got to see this side of my face. And you don't see it with the camera, but when it's 3D, it's much better. So he opens the book of Daniel and he reads the prophecies. And as Professor Dwight read Daniel's prophecies, he turned to the stack of history books on that table. And he began to read from these books some of the exact same events that were predicted by the Bible. History confirmed prophecies of the ancient Bible book. And perhaps you've been intrigued by prophecies. Perhaps you've perused YouTube and listened to a couple of people sharing their opinions. Perhaps you are looking at the current political, religious, and social environment that we're living in, and you're wondering, does the Bible have anything to say about this? Does God really exist? And if so, what is he doing about all this? Daniel has 12 chapters. That's why 12 presentations. We're going to do one chapter a week. If you wish, read the chapter before I present. That way you'll be like, yeah, I heard that. I remember that. Half of the book is stories, and the other half of the book are prophecies. The stories illustrate how we are to prepare for lions, dreams, and deceptions, and then the prophecies tell us when those things are going to happen. And so you may be asking the same question that a lot of people that I know ask the question, why are prophecies so important? Well, simply put, I have to stay right here. But that's not weird. Hello. Oh. So I don't know what it is. So I think I got to stick to this side of the table. Sorry? Right on my side here. All right, let's keep going. I'll stay to this side. My left side, my good side. How to prepare for lions and dreams and deceptions, and when and how those things will happen. We read in the book of Matthew. This is another book in the Bible. It's actually the first book in the New Testament. And Matthew was a man who became a disciple and followed Jesus for 30 some years. Actually, no, he only followed Jesus for 3.5 years. Jesus lived for 30 some years. And he says in his book, he says, then if anyone tells you, look, here is the Messiah, or there he is, don't believe it. It says, for false messiahs and false prophets will rise up and perform great signs and wonders so as to deceive, even if possible, those who are with God. He says, see, I have warned you about this ahead of time. So if someone tells you, look, the Messiah is in the desert, don't go. Or if he says, look, he's hiding in here, don't waste your time. Don't believe it. Simply put, why is it important to study prophecies? Because there's a whole bunch of false ones. Knowing what lies ahead helps us to see clearly when we are surrounded by confusion and deception. Has there been any more confusion than when it comes to COVID-19 vaccines? And I'm sad to say that a big part of the confusion is created by Christians. All kinds of predictions and stupid theories that lead people astray. It's so easy now. You just put something up on Facebook and it spreads like wildfire and people believe it. People believe it. Before we can get into the book of Daniel, though, and begin studying the first chapter, we have to ask ourselves a very important question. The book was written like 606 BC. That's like 2,600 years ago in some. How is that relevant to us today? What is the book of Daniel talking about, and when is it talking about this? Well, Daniel answers that too. Daniel answers that in the end of the book. In Daniel chapter 12, verses 4 and verses 9, it says, but you, Daniel, keep this prophecy a secret. seal up the book until the time of the end, when many will run here and there, and knowledge will increase. Let me stop there. We have not been anywhere in this world in the time past where we have had as much knowledge as we have now. And people rushing here and rushing there. Come on. I mean, we've had this COVID-19, we've sat home and we didn't know what to do with ourselves because typically we're running around like a bunch of chickens without heads. This prophecy is for the time of the end, which is now. Verse 9 says, but he said, go now, Daniel, for what I have said is kept secret and sealed until the time of the end. Now, if you don't believe me that we're at the time of the end, you're going to have to come next Saturday, because Daniel chapter 2 is unequivocally going to show you that we're living in the time of the end. But I'll just whet your appetite. I believe we're in the time of the end. Matthew chapter 24 that we just read earlier talks about pestilences and earthquakes and volcanoes and wars and political turmoil. And I mean, we're living that now, and somebody's going to say, well, that's always been there. You're right. There's been wars. There's been earthquakes. The Great Lisbon earthquake. There's been amazing catastrophes over the time, but not to the frequency and the intensity that we are living at today. We may have been able to stave off COVID-19 quicker and without as many casualties as the Spanish flu. But what about the economical, the psychological, and the social impact that's going to follow in the next year or so? Daniel's stories and prophecies are for us who are living today, if it were for anyone. Daniel wrote these things and he did not understand them, because it wasn't meant for him to understand. It was meant for us to read today and understand. And the Bible predicted that at the time of the end, knowledge would increase, many would run here and there, and it's the time we're living now in. We have more divorce, more suicide, more crime, more political greed than ever before. And I believe that Daniel can help us to get smart. We can face some of these things with some dignity. I really think that today's talk will help you to see what kind of person Daniel was. He wasn't delusional or heretical or whimsical. He was a humble man who was called for a specific purpose in the most difficult of situations. And some of you may be able to relate to what Daniel experienced. And so go to the book of Daniel. And go right to chapter 1, and we verse 1. Daniel chapter 1, verse 1. So for those of you who don't know what that means, is that in your Bible you'll have chapters. So Daniel 1, 2, 3, 4. And then 2 little dots, and then another number. That's the verse. So the verses are the sentences, I guess you could say, are inside of a chapter. And so when I say Daniel 1, 1, that's Daniel chapter 1. And then the first sentence or the first verse in that chapter, in that book. And so it says, in the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. Sounds like right out of a movie, doesn't it? The book begins with 2 cities. It begins with Babylon and Jerusalem and 2 kings, Jehoiakim and Nebuchadnezzar. Babylon has been known to be a center of confusion, of polytheism, which means believing in many gods, and also they were very thuggish. You may have seen this in movies and places, but when they used to conquer the people that they conquered, they would chop off the heads of the kings and put them on stakes all around the conquered city. They would also put hooks in people's mouths and chains tied to the hooks from one person to the next as they marched them back to their city to make them slaves. Jerusalem, on the other hand, was monotheistic. They only had one God. It was holy and a place of respect. We see here, symbolically speaking, because prophecy, even though these are stories, there's a symbol here. And the symbol, I will bring out to you, that the symbol is good versus evil. You have to see the symbols behind the scenes when you read the book of Daniel. And in this case, it sure seems like evil is winning, doesn't it? Babylon comes and it besieges the city. Sometimes I hear people say, if God is so good, then why does evil seem to triumph? And why did my husband die of cancer? Why did my child get struck by a drunk driver? Why, if God is so good, did my parents divorce? Because there is a battle behind the scenes. The battle is not somewhere in the Middle East. The battle is for your heart and for the heart of every single individual. And depending on who wins will decide how much pain will be caused. So Daniel 1 begins with this defeat. Evil seems to be winning. And it's removing the veil of our limited understanding of this world and showing us the ultimate battle between good and evil. And right now, evil is winning big time. And as a standard practice, Babylonians would choose some of the brightest and smartest and best looking of the conquered and bring them back to brainwash them for 3 years. Eventually, they would make them into what we call puppet rulers. They would just go back to the city and do everything that the king says, and they pay 60% tax. And we get a description of some of these young people that Nebuchadnezzar had brought back with him to Babylon. If you follow in verse 3, it says, then the king ordered Ashpenaz, his chief of staff, to bring to the palace some of the young men of Judah's royal family and other noble families whom he had brought to Babylon to be captives. He says, select only strong, healthy, and good-looking young men, he said. Make sure they're all well-versed in every branch of learning, are gifted with knowledge and good judgment, and are suited to serve in the royal palace. Train these young men in the language and literature of Babylon. The king assigned them a daily ration of food and wine from his own kitchens. They were to be trained for 3 years, and then they would enter royal service. And the first item on the king's agenda, his first brainwashing method, was to change their names. Daniel became Belshazzar, Hannah, Shadrach, Mishael, Meshach, and Azariah became Abednego. And the reason for changing their names was to change their identities. You see, names meant something to those people in those days. And I even know some of the parents in my church who are very intentional, or even not even my church, just everywhere. They will choose a name because they want that name to mean something for their child. I remember I have a friend whose name is Melody. And from the day she was young, the parents taught her how to sing. And when she sings, it sounds like all of you guys up here. It's just so melodious. They shaped her according to her name. They wanted her to sing. And she sounds beautiful. I mean, Daniel, in Aramaic or in the Hebrew language, means God is my judge. That's what Daniel means. But now, Belteshazzar means the keeper of the hidden treasures of Bel, which is one of the Babylonian gods. And this was to add insult to injury, as Nebuchadnezzar had taken the vessels out of Jerusalem temple, and he put those vessels in the temple of his God, just to show that his God is more powerful than their God. And now Daniel had to be the keeper of those vessels that had been now dedicated to another God. How do you think he felt about that? With a name like that, you're basically told that you have to change camp. You're going to keep an eye on the same vessels as before, but now you're going to praise another God. This reminds me of the bet that happened between the Premier of Ontario and the Premier of Quebec. Look at Doug Ford, how he's smiling right now with his Maple Leafs jersey, and look what he looks like now. When you have to wear the colors of another team, there's nothing more humiliating than that. Okay, to all my Toronto friends, I promise I'll stop with the Maple Leafs jokes. Hananiah meant the Lord is gracious to me. And now Shadrach means inspiration of the sun, S-U-N. Guess who's going to be gracious on you now? The sun. Not God. Not your God. Mishael means one who is like God. And now Meshach means the servant of the goddess Sheba. Every name had for purpose to introduce paganism, to change their focus from one God to many gods. Azariah means the Lord is my helper, and now Abednego means servant of the god Nebo. So Yahweh is no longer your helper. Nebo is going to be your helper now. He was hoping that in doing so, Nebuchadnezzar would introduce foreign beliefs in the minds and ultimately brainwash them. We see how damaging this can be if we just look at the residential school systems and how it's come up to the forefront now. How to a certain extent we've tried to just squish away a culture and make them like us. It's inhumane. It causes mental trauma, and it's cruel. The world really hasn't changed that much in 2,600 years, has it? To a certain extent, what we call human progress is a symbolic pulling away from our home base, much like Daniel and his friends had been pulled away from home. Confused and perplexed as to why God would have allowed their captivity and carried off to a strange land. Just teenagers. They were teenagers facing incredible pressures to conform to the materialistic, sex-craved, morally jaded, thrill-seeking society all around them. All they had to do was just to go along with the king's program. All they had to do was to just secure themselves a rich, secure future that was laid ahead. It would be easy to go along and much harder to resist. But Daniel and his 3 friends chose to swim against the current. And I know this sounds cliche, but I believe that there's a power, one that is identified as evil or the devil, who wishes to do the same thing with you that Nebuchadnezzar tried to do with these young men. And not just with you, but with your children and with your grandchildren. Slowly luring us into these earthly pleasures only to see us become more and more at opposition with God and all that God represents. Evolution is just a beautiful example of that. Evolution does away with intelligent design and with a loving creator. Instead, everything just happened by chance. Trust me, that theory wasn't invented by a man. It was invented by the devil to lure people away from the beautiful, beautiful truth of us being created for a purpose, for meaning, by a loving God. The reason why God began this book with a story like this instead of prophecy is because the time of the end will be just as I just described it, trying to lure us away. Many people tell me, it's impossible to really be a Christian and to serve God because everybody on television at my work and my high school is having sex before marriage, going to parties and getting smashed on drugs and dope, and they swear words and off-color jokes are at work everywhere I go. What society values and what God values, at least according to the Bible, are really worlds apart. And it's impossible to serve both. It just is impossible to serve both. And it often takes no decision on your part to serve the world, but it actually takes decision on your part to serve God. Is it harder than what Daniel and his friends had to face, what you and I are facing today? Go to Daniel 1 and verse 8. Something very interesting happens in this story. We'll start earlier, actually. Verse 3, then the king instructed Ashpenaz to bring some of the children of Israel to the king's and sent to the nobles, and those were without blemish. We go to verse 5. And the king appointed them a daily provision of the king's delicacies and of the wine which he drank, and 3 years of training for them, so that at the end of that time they may serve before the king. Now we hear about these men whose names were changed in verse 8. When Daniel sees this food, the delicacies and the wine, he says no. Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with the portion of the king's delicacies, nor with the wine which he drank. Therefore, he requested of the chief of staff, I don't want to eat that because I don't want to defile myself. Can you just imagine? You're a slave. You don't get to choose the menu. You don't get to decide what you eat. Now look at verse 9. Now God had brought Daniel into the favor and the goodwill of the chief of staff, which means Daniel was a nice guy. He had done something that made the chief of staff think twice when Daniel asked his request. Because it says, and the chief of staff said to Daniel, I fear my king, who's appointed your food and your drink. And if he sees that you look worse than the others, then guess whose head is going to be in a chopping block? Mine. There's a battle for your mind. To control your decision-making processes, and unless we purpose in our hearts, which means that we're determined, we choose, we decide, and believe it or not, somebody else is going to make the decision for you. Don't just say you don't believe in God because somebody told you that they don't believe in God. Search it for yourself. And then once you educated yourself, then you can say, I don't believe in God if you wish to. Don't just follow the crowds and say you believe in God, and then you don't search for yourself, and then when something hard happens, then you just walk away. The book of Daniel is revealing to us a young man who makes a settled choice in the depths of his mind and emotions that he will not defile himself by conforming to the evil around him. Okay, well, come on, Francis. What's evil about drinking a little wine and eating some delicacies? Well, the reality is, and sometimes you have to understand the context, is that these foods that Daniel was going to eat, they had been sacrificed to idols. It was a ritual that they did in those days. They would sacrifice the food to idols, and then they would eat it, especially when it came to the king and the noble. And this food had to be, and by doing so, by eating that food, you are actually giving priority, you are worshiping, giving homage to those gods. And like I told you earlier, Daniel came from Jerusalem, and Jerusalem was a monotheistic city. It was a monotheistic culture, which they only believed in one God. And their faithfulness to that God was actually pretty important, so much so that he would not eat the food. And when it comes to the wine, well, I don't need to tell you what wine can do. Yeah, I know, the studies have proven that it does a little good for the heart. It does a lot of bad to the mind because most of us can't control it. And Daniel knew that. And so he chose to just stay away. The battle for the time of the end is not somewhere obscure in the world where some culture is going to conquer everybody. No, the battle is for your mind. The battle is for your mind right now. And Satan has had 6,000 years to practice on how to get to you, so he can lead you away from God. I'm telling you something right now. Yes, I didn't grow up as a Christian. I grew up as a Catholic. We didn't practice very much. Yeah, my religion was my parents' religion at a certain point. And then I got to a certain age where I had to make a decision for myself. Is this true? Is this not true? And I studied. And I looked into it myself. And I asked questions. I went to people I trusted. And I can tell you, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that today I believe in God because God is making a difference in my life. Because God is touching me and changing me in ways that I never thought He could do that. And I hope that He can do the same thing for you. And I know He can, and He will if you give Him a chance. We're not merely highly evolved animals that some people would want you to believe. We can choose. God wants us to exercise our power to make decisions about how we live. And if we ask Him, He is willing to help us to carry out those decisions. There's an East Coast university that did a test on monkeys some years ago. They noted that there was an area in the brain that controlled pleasure, so the scientists connected an electrode to this pleasure center deep within the monkey's brain. And monkeys operate on a physical and biological instinctive level, not on the human level of logic and reasoning, or reason and choice. The scientists rigged up a button that could be pushed. And every time that button was pushed, an electrical stimulation would go into the brain and make that monkey feel good. It made the monkey feel happy. They put the monkey in a cage and they put the button right next to him to see how strong the desire would be for the monkey to experience pleasure. It wasn't too long until the monkey figured out the relationship between the button and feeling good. And he began to push the button repeatedly and repeatedly. They even put a little monkey girl in the cage with them, with lipstick and a little tutu. I don't think they did that, but they put a little monkey girl in the cage. Button, that's all he cared about. He didn't care about the female. He didn't care about any of that. He's pressing that button. They put food in there. They put delicacies and wine, whatever you want to call it. The monkey, had they not removed the button, would have starved because he didn't even go to the food. He just kept pressing the button. And isn't that what our society is like today? Come on, let's face it. Sometimes we know we should go for a jog, but we'll watch the football game instead. We know we should do this, but we'll do that. We know we shouldn't do this, but we like it too much. We know certain foods we shouldn't eat. Oh, it's only on the weekend. It's okay. You know how we do it, right? We justify. We want it. Sometimes I think that we are pleasure monkeys. We'll justify buying a car for $30,000 more. We'll find all kinds of rationales for doing it, but at the end of the day, it's because we want it. I like it. I want that car. I tried that with my wife recently. You know what? I should ask my wife before I share a wife story, so I'm going to stop right there. I need to be respectful. But I believe we are a bunch of pleasure monkeys. Whether it's gambling, sex outside of marriage, alcohol. Yeah, I know, I'm old school, blah, blah, blah. But look back 100 years ago, that stuff was done in basements somewhere in hiding because it just wasn't right. People today lose their shirts because they gamble their life away. People lose their families because they drink their life away. And it's just like, I need it, I need it, I need it. What has changed? Just us. If Satan can keep us focused on the pleasure and attractions of this world, then as you're going to find out next week, we will have very little interest in the world to come. I was watching a presentation from a psychiatrist who's talking about dopamine. Dopamine is a natural hormone in our bodies that is secreted by simple things like a bird or a waterfall, or even just looking at a mechanical design that you just go, wow, who designed this? And what he's saying is that now that we are seeking certain pleasures that secrete a lot of dopamine, we no longer get excited when we see a bird. We no longer get excited when we go for a 1-hour walk, because it's just not stimulating enough, because we have overstimulated ourselves with things that weren't meant to stimulate us. Pleasure monkeys. And all the pleasures of the Babylonian kingdom was at Daniel's fingertips. But he purposed in his heart not to partake. He was determined not to defile himself by eating the food and wine given to him by the king. And so now I want you to understand that this is the kind of person who wrote this book. This is the kind of man who wrote this book, or at least the story of him. And whatever he has to say, whether he wrote it or he dictated it to somebody else, I respect a man like that. I respect a woman like that. A man or a woman of integrity. What they have to say has value to me, because I too want my no to be a no and my yes to be a yes. I want to know more about what he knew. I want to know more about what God did in his life. Because he went from a brainwashed slave to the most powerful man that ever existed in that world, next to King Nebuchadnezzar, over the span of 80 years. He was so convicted that he even put his standard to the test. Go to Daniel chapter 1 and we go to verse 11. So he knows that Ashpenaz is really concerned here. He's already feeling the blade. Like, you got to eat the stuff, dude, because if you don't, my head's off. He says, Daniel said to Ashpenaz, please test your servants for 10 days. 10 days, verse 12. And let us eat vegetables and let us drink water. Then let our appearance be examined before you, and the appearance of the young men who eat the portion of the king's delicacies. Compare us. 10 days. Sophie, 10 days. You teach people health. You do exercise. You're doing exercise class. Do you think that 10 days can help? She believes it. She's actually a walking miracle of it, a testimony of it. And then he says, you test us, and then you do with us whatever you want. So he consented with this matter, and he tested them for 10 days. That takes a lot of faith to say, 10 days. 10 days. And we finish the story. It's almost finished. It says here, at the end of the 10 days, their features appeared better and fatter in flesh than all the young men who ate the portion of the king's delicacies. Thus the steward took away their portion of delicacies, and he took away the wine to drink, and he gave them vegetables and water. As for these 4 young men, God gave them knowledge and skill in all literature and wisdom, and Daniel had understanding of visions and dreams. Now at the end of the 10 days, verse 18, when the king had said that they should be brought in, the chief of the eunuch brought them first before the king. I'm going to show you my best. The vegetarians. And the king interviewed them. And among them all, none was found like Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Notice that Daniel wrote their true names here, not their Babylonian names. Stick it to them a little bit, you know? And in all matters of wisdom and understanding, verse 20, basically anything that requires an important decision about which the king examined them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and the astrologers who were in his realm. You see, the reality of a relationship with God. Unless you're willing to let Him remove the things that separate you from Him, you cannot receive the rich blessings He has for you. How many of you would like to have wisdom and understanding like Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah? I do. I want that. It's actually quite simple. It's not something that the world tells you should do, but there's 3 steps. I'll give them to you. I'll put them on the screen. Determined to give God a chance. Perhaps for you, this is the first time you're hearing about this God thing, and you don't know what I'm talking about, and but just determine in your mind, oh wait, I'm going to give him a chance, a second, a third, a fourth, or maybe a first chance. Number 1, because that opens up your heart to something new. Number 2, determined to give God a voice. What I mean by that is that you have to allow God to teach you some of the things in your life that shouldn't be there. Some of the things that are hurting you. And so that means that when God speaks, you listen. And number 3, determined to give God the time. And you know what that means? And that's the most beautiful part of this whole thing. Is that even though God will teach you and me certain things in our lives that shouldn't be there, we're still going to do some of those things. We're humans. And we like I said, we like some of those things. But as we continue to spend time, determined to give God the time, spend time with God, your life changes. Amen? And it takes time for certain things. There's certain things that will be removed right away. You're going to start to feel a warm, fuzzy feeling. And then there's other things that it's going to take a little bit longer. But give God the time. He does not give up on you, so don't give up on Him. Pretty simple, right? Determined to give God a chance, a voice, and time. And I can tell you, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that things will begin to change. And I don't know about you, but I haven't followed up on all the things that I've wanted to do in my life. Right, Melissa? You and I, we know. I haven't. And I relate to a man by the name of Paul in the Bible. He wrote in the New Testament. He's one of the most influential men that have ever lived on the face of the earth. He wrote almost the whole New Testament. And at one point he says, I do the evil things that I don't want to do, and the good things that I want to do, those I don't do. I can relate to that. And then he says what? There's a solution. He says, oh, wretched man that I am, I thank God I can get help through Jesus Christ. And I know you may not know what that means right now through Jesus Christ, but if you stick around, we're going to unwrap that quite a bit. When we determine in our heart to be faithful to God, He will help us and He will pick us up when we fail. You see, God is not some arbitrary guy with a thunderbolt just waiting to throw it at us when we mess up. No, instead He's got His hands like this and He's going to pick us up. I don't know what kind of picture of God people have painted for you, but you need to start to paint one for yourself. And not based on what the news media tell you, but based on what this book says. And I recommend, just start reading it. right at the beginning in the book of Matthew in the New Testament. Just start reading it. Just have an open mind. Don't worry about what people say. Just do it for yourself in the privacy of your home and start to figure out what this whole God thing is about. I don't want you to be religious. I just want you to develop your spiritual side. Religion sometimes has done wrong to God. God is a friend that understands that we by nature do wrong. So he sent his son, they call him Jesus, who did no wrong, to give us hope if we accept what Jesus has done for us. And what he's done for me is he's died on a wooden cross some 2,000 years ago. And he says that if I accept that, then he died for me, so that I don't have to die for my sins. So, yes, Daniel chapter 1 starts on a really bad foot. His people, his city, and himself are taken captive. Evil seemed to have the upper hand. And if we look at this world here today, I don't know, it just seems like evil seems to have the upper hand too. But as you've seen, Daniel and his 3 friends, they triumphed over the temptation of Babylon, and God was the determining influence in their lives. Maybe there's something that you need to triumph over in your life. Maybe you've tried in different ways. Maybe you need to just add God to some of those things that you've done. It's not like God is a solution to everything. Sometimes you do need to see psychiatrists. Sometimes you do need to do exercise. Sometimes you do need to change your diet. It's not just, okay, God, Jesus, thank you. No, it doesn't work that way. God has solutions for us here, but he wants to be part of that. He wants to be the guide. Because he knows you. He fashioned you. He made you the way you are. You are the way you are because he made you that way. You didn't just come up out of somewhere, out of the ground somewhere as a worm. 10 times smarter. 10 times smarter. And what's even more amazing is the fact that he served like this as an incredibly smart man for the length of his stay in Babylon, and even into the reign of the Medes and the Persians who conquered Babylon years later. Because if you look at the closing verse of Daniel chapter 1, it says, Daniel remained in the royal service until the first year of the reign of King Cyrus. Which means that if we look back at history, Daniel was a wise man for 4 kings. 4 kings. An advisor, a foreign advisor. You'll see in Daniel chapter 6 what the local advisors thought of Daniel. That's the lion's den story. That's a good one. That's Daniel chapter 6, so I'm not going to get ahead of myself. Kings rise. Is it Daniel chapter 5? I don't know. We'll see. Kings rise and fall. Empires rise and fall. Democrats, Republicans, liberals, conservatives, they all fall. They don't last. They'd like to think that they would. And they'd like to think that if they reigned forever, the country would be so much better. God forbid, right? Babylon was the dominant empire from 606 BC to 539 BC. But it wasn't to last. Nebuchadnezzar was followed on his throne by sons and grandsons, but it ended. And what we have here in this story is a true follower of God. One that I inspired to be like, and I know that deep inside you also aspire to be like this, that your no will be a no and your yes will be a yes. And that you will stand on something solid based on something beyond yourself. And like Daniel, there are men and women today in this age who also have a passion to serve God, no matter what is given to them or no matter what is taken away. And mark my words, the cheap tinsel of secularism and godlessness is soon to crumble like a sand castle by the waves, because there is a new king coming. God's men and women who purpose in their hearts to serve him will pass from one kingdom to the next, and they will live forever with him. But you have to be willing to swim against the current. You have to be willing to be an underdog. That's the message of Daniel chapter 1 for us today. And I hope that it is your desire to purpose in your heart to even just begin a conversation about what it means to follow God, the one who created you and fashioned you with gifts and talents. And join me, because I wish the same. I really think it's time to stand up. And our society today has stood up for a lot of things, a lot of good things. There's just one thing missing. We need to stand up for God. I know it's crazy, but I really believe that there's some one thing that your heart has always wanted, but we've always avoided. And maybe because you've been afraid, or you've seen what religious people have done. Don't judge religion or God by what people do. Judge it by what he wants to do in you through this book. That's it. Leave it to that. Because we all make mistakes. Sometimes we're well-intentioned, but we're just so misguided. And give God that chance. So even though Daniel may have seemed to be the underdog, even though it may have seemed like evil was winning the battle, Daniel came out the winner in the end. 10 times the winner. He served faithfully under 4 kings in a span of 80-some years. And as you will see next week, God shared a prophecy through this young man that you will not believe. That prophecy shut up all those atheists who were sitting in that room when Timothy presented the history books. Perhaps for you, there's been an awakening already, and somebody invited you to join us, and you just, this is time. And perhaps instead of just listening to me, you want to do a one-on-one. And I have a team of people right now who are willing to just go on Zoom with you once a week and answer some of the questions you have about God. And so this is my email. You can write me and tell me, Francis, okay, I don't agree with a lot of things you just said. I have some questions for you. And I just want to know more. And I'm willing to go on that journey with you. I only charge $5 a minute. No, I'm just kidding. I don't charge anything. I'm just kidding. It's a joke. It's free. But I'd be happy to spend some time. And I have, like I said, there's some people here who are willing to do that as well. Perhaps just to get to know the God that maybe you haven't known, or the God that you may want to discover. So, there it is, the underdog. Daniel, a teenager turned wise advisor until the end of his days. What is it that God revealed to him that is so important to you and me? You'll have to come next week for the next sermon entitled, The Toenails of History.